Welcome to the Savvy Leader Podcast. I'm Kristin, and I'm here to challenge how you think, lead, and show up. Because this isn't about surface level success. This is about clarity, alignment, and making decisions that actually move your life forward. If you're ready to stop performing and start leading with real intention, then you are in the right place, my friends. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Savvy Leader Podcast. I'm Kristin, and today I want to talk about courageous conversations. And I'm not just talking the big dramatic conversations that people usually imagine when they hear that phrase. I mean just everyday conversations too. The ones where you're just asking for some extra help, or maybe you need some clarity. How about setting a boundary or two? Maybe you want to be honest about a situation or admit that you're struggling. Maybe you need to introduce yourself to someone new. Or finally, maybe it's time for you to say the thing that you've been carrying silently for far, far too long. Because honestly, for most of my life, I've avoided these kinds of conversations whenever possible. Not professionally, oh no. Professionally, I could lead meetings, coach employees, train teams, handle difficult clients and customers, and navigate conflict all day long. But personally, that's a whole nother story. Personally, I overthought everything, of course, and I think a lot of that came from just growing up in an environment where I often felt like my mere presence was irritating instead of welcomed, shall we say. And when you grow up feeling emotionally dismissed or unwanted like that, you really start to believe that you need to earn your place at the table. You believe you've got to prove your value. You need to be useful, productive, needed, or even impressive before you deserve connection. And that mindset, it'll follow you all the way through your adulthood as long as you let it. You become hyper aware of rejection, tone, body language, inconvenience, and whether or not you think people even want you around. So instead of risking that kind of discomfort, you avoid. You stay quiet. You become independent to a fault. You stop asking for help. You convince yourself that it is so much easier not to need anything from anyone ever again. For a long time, you guys, that was me. Absolutely. But one of the unexpected gifts of living on the road has been to get out of that shell. Living on the road has forced me to become more conversational. Because when you're constantly in unfamiliar places, you gotta ask some questions. I needed to approach strangers, ask directions, navigate uncertainties, and meet new people. And I needed to become comfortable not always knowing what in the hell I was doing at all times. Because of my husband's limitations after his motorcycle crash, I didn't feel like I could rely on him the same way I used to. Like when the handyman showed up and I'd send him outside to talk to him, I couldn't do that anymore. I had to step forward myself and talk to the repair guy. At first, you guys, I really hesitated. I did. I'd rehearse simple interactions in my head. I'd walk into a store and be worried about sounding stupid. I didn't want to bother anybody. I was afraid I'd ask too many questions. Then one day I realized something so simple. You know, most people are just not analyzing us nearly as much as we think they are. Most conversations, you guys, are not mountains. They're moments. And moments pass. Even awkward moments pass. Even uncomfortable conversations pass. And rejection, that passes too. That realization changed something inside of me. Because the fear, was exaggerating the human interaction into something so much bigger than it ever could possibly have been. Over time, I really started to approach conversations and even courageous conversations differently. Not perfectly, but more intentionally, absolutely. And I learned a few things that I want to share with you. Here's some of the things that helped me the most. Number one, get the hell out of your head, please, for the love of all things good. You must know that most difficult conversations only become difficult inside of our minds. And long before they ever even happen, we rehearse the rejection, the conflicts, the criticisms, and of course, the worst case scenarios. Please stop doing that to yourself. And we create these entire emotional outcomes before the other person's even said a single word. And sometimes those fears, they're rooted in real experiences, though. It's important to keep that in mind. For me, many of them really were. When you grow up feeling like your voice either doesn't matter or creates some kind of irritation, you learn to anticipate negative reactions completely automatically. Eventually, though, I needed to figure out how to separate the past from the present because not everyone is responding to me through the lens of my childhood. Not every interaction is a threat. Not every uncomfortable feeling means danger. And courage is not the absence of discomfort. It's being willing to move forward while feeling uncomfortable, moving through the challenge instead of around the challenge. There's a huge difference. The second thing I learned, and this one changed the quality of all of my conversations dramatically, was entering into each conversation from a state of curiosity. Instead of entering conversations trying to defend myself, protect my position, or control the direction, I started entering with curiosity, seeking clarity, which sounds a lot more like, can you help me understand where you're coming from? Tell me more about that. What was your experience like? Maybe there's something I'm not seeing. Can you help me figure that out? What I realized, you guys, was that most people, we just want to be heard, right? You know this because you're one of them. We don't want to be fixed, corrected, certainly not controlled, just heard. And curiosity lowers defenses. It creates space for honesty instead of combat. And honestly, some of the best conversations in my life happened after I stopped trying to win and started trying to really understand. Because understanding another person doesn't mean you're abandoning your own convictions. It simply means that you're making room for their humanity too. This next one is going to be especially difficult for people in leadership roles, caretakers, peacemakers, and even problem solvers. And that is to stop trying to control, I say trying, to control the outcome because you can't. We want resolution. We want clarity. We want mutual understanding. We want the relationship repaired. We want people to see our intentions accurately. But courageous conversations are not successful because they end on a perfect note. They're successful because you showed up and you were honest and you cared. That's it. You cannot control someone's emotional maturity. You can't control timing or reactions. You can't control their interpretation or even their willingness to engage. You can only control how you show up. And trying to manage someone else's response creates enormous emotional exhaustion within yourself. Sometimes people misunderstand you anyway, even after all of that. Sometimes conversations remain unresolved. Sometimes that closure just never comes. But avoidance costs us far more than honesty ever could. That brings me to the next thing that I learned, and that is how to empathize. Because empathy does not mean agreement. Let's be clear on that. I think that that's really important. You can understand someone's pain without excusing harmful behavior. You know this. And one of the biggest examples of this in my life was my relationship with my dad. We didn't have the best relationship. It could be really hurtful, emotionally harsh, and the connection was just not there. It just didn't work. For many years, I carried a lot of hurt about that. It really affected me growing up. And if I'm honest, there was a part of me that always hoped we would eventually have some kind of a conversation, the one where everything became clear and everything was understood, and the conversation where hurt was acknowledged and then repaired. But we never did. We never had that conversation. And oddly enough, unexpectedly, I'm totally at peace with it now. Over time, you guys, I started to see my father through a different lens. I realized he grew up without a father himself, and he never had the kind of role model that he needed to provide him with emotional safety, communication skills, healthy connections, let alone so many other things. And while that doesn't erase the hurt, it helped me to understand something really, really important. And that is, people can only give from the level of healing, awareness, and emotional capacity that they now possess. Sometimes people hurt others because they themselves were never taught how to love well. Again, this doesn't excuse harmful behaviors, but empathy really helped me to release some of the hurt that I had carried for so long. And sometimes healing doesn't come through the conversation. Sometimes it comes through acceptance. And that's the next thing we need to talk about, which may be the hardest step of all: acceptance. Accepting that not every conversation is going to go well. Not every relationship gets repaired, and not everyone has the emotional tools to meet you halfway. Not every person is capable of meaningful communication. This is the part that people just don't talk about, right? Like, sometimes you're out there genuinely trying. You came to the table. You wanted to have the conversation. You were honest, respectful, calm. You had the best intentions. And then they responded with defensiveness or hostility, maybe silence, or maybe a complete emotional shutdown, and they walked away. And when that happens, it's important to understand this. This is not a failure. This is a conversation that wasn't meant to happen, not right now. And it's not your fault. They're just not ready. Some people are carrying wounds so much bigger than we know. And some people don't even know how to regulate their emotions in healthy ways. Some people feel really threatened by conversations like this, and some people are deeply committed to misunderstanding others because then it's going to protect the narrative that they really want to believe. At that point, you've got a tough decision to make. You got to ask yourself whether or not the conversation is going to be productive. Are you seeking clarity or just chasing some validation? Is continued engagement going to create healing or do further damage? Courage is not only speaking. Courage is also stepping away, stepping to the side, in peace. Sometimes courage is accepting that closure may never come from that other person. Sometimes courage is saying that I communicated honestly, respectfully, and then as clearly as I could. And that has to be enough for now. Because peace doesn't always come from resolution. Sometimes peace comes from releasing the need to force resolution. Courageous conversations are rarely about becoming louder. They're usually about becoming more honest, more grounded, more present, and more willing to step into the light. If you've spent years avoiding conversations because of fears or insecurities, rejection, or old wounds, I understand you. I see you. I hear you. But I also want you to know this. Most conversations are not mountains. They are moments, and moments pass. The more we stop catastrophizing human interaction, the more freedom we gain in our lives, relationships, business, leadership, and personal growth. So this week, maybe your courageous conversation isn't some massive confrontation. Maybe it's asking for help, introducing yourself, seeking clarity, setting one boundary, or finally saying the thing that you've been carrying for so long. Small acts of courage still count. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today on the Savvy Leader podcast. And if this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who might need encouragement to step into the conversations that they have been avoiding. Until next time, stay grounded, stay honest, keep on moving forward. Thanks for listening to the Savvy Leader podcast. If something in this conversation made you think differently, that's the point. Share this episode with someone who needs it and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's next. For more conversations on clarity, alignment, and real leadership, connect with me through the SavvyLivingNetwork.com and join the conversation at the Savvy Leaders Lounge on Substack. Until next time, lead with intention.